I think it's kind of privileged to be one of the editors of Sociology during this very special birthday of the journal. And we wanted to put this sort of session together when we were thinking about what we could do way back in the autumn last year. We wanted to think about what we could do which would create a sort of opportunity to think about what sociology, the journal, is to sociology, the discipline in the UK, and how that sort of relationship, iterative and contingent, has developed over 5 decades.
When I was reviews editor, as Sarah said, with Peter McMyler and Liz and David were editors, I was really pretty early career. I had a temporary lectureship at Manchester then. So it was really quite a big thing to be drawn into a team that was going to last considerably longer than my contract at the time. And I think we all know about those things in different. So it was very affirming to be included. I mean, I had been involved in various BSA things before that, but it was a really big deal for me. And we picked up the baton from Janet Finch, Nick Abercrombie, Alan Walden, Larry Ray, and I can remember that day in Lancaster with all the boxes and carrying the boxes and etc. And I think, yes, being part of a team, we did have shared discussions. We didn't have, it wasn't that you're just reviews editors or whatever. And Sarah Dimmola, who was our administrative assistant, was very much part of the team. And back then, it was index cards and letters, headed paper, and just really the beginning of using email to communicate. So I think that that really makes you think everything took a lot longer. Getting reviews back from people probably takes a long time now. It took a long time then for different sorts of reasons, but snail mail and such. But it was certainly a learning process for me in terms of that that kind of organisational work, in terms of feeling in the middle of something important, because that journal, I've been reading it since I was a student, and I was first a student in 1971, so I've been reading it for 20 years by the time I got involved, and it just felt like that was the beating heart of sociology. I suppose the other points I wanted to make are about what it means for it to be the flagship journal of the BSA. Wes is a great journal, cultural sociology is doing incredibly well, 10 years on doing incredibly well. But sociology is the flagship journal, and I still see it as kind of the beating heart of the sociological community. I don't care if that sounds old-fashioned, I just risk sounding old-fashioned. I think it's really important. It's obviously really important to the BSA, to the members, to all of us.
When we came to editorship in 2009, we set for ourselves, and we're public about this in a foreword, some objectives for the journal. The first and most general of these, and it's going to provide the theme for what I want to say, I think, is that we saw the journal, this is the community point, I think, that Sue was making just a moment ago. We saw the journal as having a responsibility to sustain and promote a conversation. Conversation is going to be my buzzword between members of the association, and also in a wider way amongst sociologists and their colleagues. It was thinking about the journal in that way was at the forefront of our editorial mission. How could we imagine the journal as a conversation taking place on the page, and how could we sustain and promote that? Particularly in relation to that, we had the ambition to develop the reviews section, so I'm going to say a little bit about reviews, even though something's already been said, to extend the international profile of the journal, which we took some steps towards, and also to try and make the peer review process a little bit more transparent. We were keen to widen participation geographically in terms of submission and readership, and that was happening already. So, insofar as it continued to happen under our period as editors, I don't think we can take that, directly attributed to our efforts, but efforts we did make. The journal is open. I mean, you can read it wherever in the world you might be if you have the means to access it. There's no prohibition in that sense. And you can submit to it wherever in the world you might be, given the same, if you've got a journal article together, and you're happy to send it to us rather than anywhere else. But we felt we had to be more proactive in this, and one of the things that we did throughout our period of editorship was really push ourselves as an editorial team out and about. I remember the highlight of that was a trip to the ISA in Gothenburg that year. It was myself and Sally Power, not just to be in attendance, but to have a stall where the journal was promoted, to meet with anybody who wanted to come and talk and find out more about the journal, how they might submit it, and more than that, to attend as many sessions as we possibly could, and in the hotel bedroom late at night, work our way through the entire programme, underlining and highlighting abstracts which looked interesting or like the sort of thing that what we, and then sending out a whole series of emails over a day spent just emailing from the conference to various people who appeared in the programme saying, look, are you still around? We missed your paper because we were in another session. We'd really like to see you submit the journal. That kind of work was one of the great satisfactions of editorship.
Tony and I and David and Ruth, we travelled down to Plymouth to take the journal over from David Mason. So we had a lovely trip down there, and what was great is the editorial assistant, and I think the role of the editorial assistant is so important. The wonderful Anna Musgrave, who was editorial assistant to David's team, she came back. In fact, she physically brought the journal. She brought the filing cabinets, the boxes, in a van from Plymouth to Staffordshire. And she stayed, and just that kind of administrative process, the flow, the sort of bureaucratic process, so important to have someone so great as her to support us, the editors, in doing our job. And so Tony and I physically worked together with Anna in an office for 2 days a week. We sat side by side, we kind of did the workflow together, and I'm not sure how later editors did that, but that was our preferred model. And being alongside Anna as well was great, just in terms of immediacy of kind of reaction and so on. What's kind of interesting in terms also of, I guess, those relationships that develop and the conversations that develop in the course in these spaces is that Anna got involved in my research with asylum seekers and refugees and went off to do an MA in refugee studies at the University of East London, and is quite a senior position in the Refugee Council now, was behind the fabulous report, Dignity and Maternity, that some of you may remember being published a couple of years ago. Definitely no dignity and maternity for asylum seekers and refugees. And that kind of, there's a slippage there to these sociological, these points of sociological urgency, and I think this is certainly in our editorship, a focus on the asylum migration issue. It was really interesting going back to the conference we ran and the special edition we had of the journal that Stephen Castles was the keynote for, towards a sociology of forced migration, thinking about those issues then and the sort of spectre we have in front of us now, and the sort of devastating things happening in Greece and Turkey, in terms of forced migration. My experience as a relatively early career researcher, so for me, I was the first person in my family to go to university, and so I'd like to comment on the role personally and politically for me, in being co-editor with Tony, with Ruth, and also with David. It certainly had a huge impact on my sociological imagination and also my sociological sensibilities. And it impacted not only on my own research, but on teaching and networking. It was incredibly powerful to be part of those kind of networks. Different approaches to theorising, I'd been kind of trained in a sort of critical theory background, but to be networking with people from different theoretical approaches. Obviously reading the papers was fantastic as well. But also methodological innovations, and ideas on the page, but also in person at conferences and at networking events. The editorial board was great, had a huge impact, and it was really enlivening. It really enlivened my own sociological work and sociological imagination.
We, Kathy Pope and I, as editors, did run a special issue on the future of the research relationship, and I think that was interesting in terms of what it brought in, it certainly didn't bring in what we thought it would bring in. It brought in some things we weren't expecting. It didn't necessarily bring in all of the things that we thought might come in. But we like to think that was quite an interesting place to reflect on the changing nature of research practice and the relationship between researchers and researched. We did at the time have a number of concerns. One of them, I think, is this point about how the journal sits alongside more specialist journals. So crime and deviance, for example, is, I think, kind of not very noticeable in the journal now because people tend to send publications in that area to more specialist journals. And as I've already mentioned here, this point about the strategist paper. So there are some things that editors can do to set agendas, but there are also limits as well. One of the surprising things, I suppose, was that we took over as editors and found that already the next year and a half's worth of issues were already spoken for by things that were either accepted or were in the pipeline and under revision and so on. So in terms of making a mark, if someone does do this analysis of the different editorial teams, it will be important to see how the impact of a particular editorial team, there's a lag between when they are in that position and seeing their influence. But I don't think it's always possible to have as much impact as one might like. One of the things, in going back to the first issue from 1967, is the piece there by Joe Banks, where he's reflecting on the history of the BSA from its foundation in 1951. And he's talking about discussions within the BSA and about various agenda-setting activities or various agenda-setting ideas. It's interesting, given the sessions I've been in at this conference relating to sociologists' careers and the position of early career researchers in particular. Back in the 1950s, there was a debate going on about the job prospects of early career researchers in sociology and the importance of training in order to improve their position when they were looking to get employment as sociologists. And then this other point, which is really a kind of forerunner of impact in the ref impact sense. And I'll just read it out. He says, this is Joe Banks, certain deliberations, for example those which led to the decision that the association should, where it was appropriate, make sociological evidence available to public bodies, have been ignored, largely because the occasions when this has been done have been neither numerous nor especially noteworthy. So people in those early days were struggling with trying to kind of get sociology out there and noticed and taken seriously by policymakers and others. And it's interesting to note as well that some of those early discussions that Joe Banks talks about also touch very much on interdisciplinarity, and some of the early meetings of the BSA were incredibly interdisciplinary and included perhaps a majority of people who now, in terms of this question about who counts as a sociologist, wouldn't now be classified as sociologists.
As Sue has already said, the current editorial team proposed, suggested, or at least asked the question about what is the role of book reviews in a journal. Now, I'm not for them or against them. I mean, I'm kind of probably slightly sceptical, to be honest. But I think the question people ought to ask themselves is that in a kind of multimedia age, when you can review books in Discover Society or 101 different outlets, and you can review them immediately on the web or in social media or in the LSE review of books and so on, what actual purpose does a journal review process serve? Now, when I was a student, it served the purpose that this is kind of where you cut your teeth. You kind of learned how to get into journals by trying to review books for them. That's not a bad thing to do, but there are plenty of other places to do that as well. But the other part of the evolution is that, I mean, Tom mentioned symposia, and one of the things we've tried to do is carry on with that policy, but also to try and refresh it in a way. I mean, I think it still never had this idea that somehow there were eminent people who were reviewing books by somebody else. And we've tried to get away from that by having people review each other's books, by having dual symposia, by having people respond to the other reviews in the pages of the journal and so on. Without actual feedback from readers, it's actually very hard to know what people make of that. But this is kind of part of maybe about the evolutionary strategy of the journal and where it should be going. being the editor of the journal is partly about sort of stewardship or guardianship. You're only going to be editor for 3, 4 or 5 years. You're always going to hand it on. It's not like a journal where you're going to be here for in perpetuity for a long period of time. But the question is, there's got to be something more to it than just administering the workload. You've actually got to try and shape it in the way in which all the 4 speakers have said. Now, it's interesting to kind of hear the contributors, because we published when you bid for the journal, you kind of make a statement about why you want to be the editors, and that's presumably the basis on which you're accepted. And in our very first editorial statement, we actually sort of publish a version of that. And I would just say very briefly, I mean, three of the reasons why we wanted to be editors were, one was about internationalization, which has already been mentioned, and I won't go more about that. The other one was about impact, which I won't say more about that as well. But the third thing was actually about whether the journal could be made more interactive or not, which again, all the contributors have touched on. And we were thinking about how do you make a journal interactive in a sort of web space and so on. I don't say we found the answer to this, and Tom's point about conversation is quite right. But actually, it's incredibly difficult to work out how and where you have conversations. There is no end of people who, given the space, want to say, I want to respond to what somebody said about my article, which is all well and good, but we really haven't got the space to do that. And we can offer them an online space, but actually not many people want to take that up. So I think those are just 3 or 4 points which I hope may be things that we can think about in terms of sociology now, but also where it might go in the future.